It was ugly in there. That is how a 12-year-old girl described the conditions inside the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Station in Clint, Texas.
An immigrant child from Guatemala has died after being apprehended at the U.S. border.
Doctors and attorneys say hundreds of young people are living under inhumane conditions at a Texas border control station.
A tragic image from the southern border reveals the grim reality facing many Central American migrants.
Describes dangerous, standing room only conditions at a detention center for adults in El Paso, Texas.
I could tell you about the smell of the dirt, sweat, and feces in the courtyard. I could tell you about the boy who walked for 37 days with his father. I could tell you about the women in detention who were given uniforms that had to be kept clean, but due to a lack of feminine hygiene products, ultimately got blood on them. How as punishment, they are removed from the group and put into isolation in freezing cold rooms. The cruelty, after all, is the point. I could tell you about those who were lucky enough to have sneakers, wore what they could, crunching the backs down if they were too small. But I want to tell you about a bag. It's not big, it's not fancy. It's such an unspectacular bag you probably wouldn't even notice it. On my first day at the shelter, a man asked me for a mochila, a backpack. When I looked down, he had 2 ripped plastic bags holding his life. When I looked around the courtyard, I noticed he wasn't the only one. Then it hit me. If you had to put your whole life in a bag, what would you take? Would you take clothes, medicine, a blanket? Or would you take pictures of your family so you wouldn't forget their faces? Because you wouldn't have room for it all. A bag is more than a bag when it can restore some dignity to someone that has lived a much harder life than anything we can imagine. Before I became a candidate for Congress, a few friends and I went to El Paso to bring supplies to migrants being released from detention. We heard the shelters were past capacity and bus stations were overflowing. When we got down there, El Paso was a ghost town. The Trump administration had ramped up their Remain in Mexico policy. People being released from detention were being dumped on street corners back in Mexico to await their hearings. So we went across the border to a shelter in Juarez to help. The next day, we returned to the shelter with over 350 backpacks, toys, clothes, sneakers, and supplies. We painted nails, handed out toys, blew bubbles with the kids, laughed, and cried. With all the rhetoric, the misinformation, the fighting over what to call things and who's to blame, we lose sight of one single fact. These are people fleeing violence for a chance not only to survive, but to live. Immigration reform is needed. The solution isn't locking kids in cages. It's a path to citizenship that doesn't violate basic human rights or deny due process. No one is coming to save our country from its moral crisis. It's up to us. We need to do more. We need to be able to tell future generations that we didn't stay silent and we didn't look away.